The night was clear and the moon was yellow. And the leaves came tumbling down, da da da. I was standing by the corner when I heard my bulldog bark. It was barking at two men who were gambling in the dark. Da da. Stagger Lee and Billy, the two men who were gambling. Stagger Lee drew a 7, and then Billy, he drew 8. Ba-da-da-da. Stagger Lee, said Billy, I can't let you go with that. You have won all of my money in my brand new Stetson hat. Stagger Lee went home and he got his 44. He said, I'm going to the bar and I'll pay that debt I owe. Stagger Lee shot Billy. Oh, he shot that boy oh so bad. And the bullet went through Billy and it broke the bar tender as glass. That song is like a African American urban murder ballad from the turn of the century. Stagger Lee is like a kind of a gangsta John Henry. It apparently all stems from an actual incident of a gambling inspired shooting in St. Louis, I believe, in the early 20th century, in the black segregated black section of St. Louis. And then the guy who who shot the guy, became a folk hero. And there's a bunch of versions of Stagger Lee with a bunch of different lyrics. But the story is always basically the same. Billy beats Stagger Lee. It's crap or thrown dice, and wins his hat from him. That's often a detail. Then Stagger Lee just gets a gun and kills him. That's it. I was basically singing the Lloyd Price arrangement. Lloyd Price, who just recently died. He died a couple weeks ago. Also, he did Stagger Lee. He did Personality, which is another great song, and he was best friends with Don King. Fascinating guy. So yes, that's a classic song. Yeah, Stack O'Lee, also known as Stack O'Lee. It is. It's the same dynamic you see created in folk musical traditions throughout the world, but it is really it is an urban African American appropriation of like the European murder ballad. You want to talk about cultural appropriation? Like that is a good example of how culture is literally interaction. The culture is defined by things striking each other. A stable cultural element is not culture, or is not culture at all. It's stagnant and it dies. And the proof of that is that the culture of the late 19th century that is most forgotten now, the culture that is completely dissolved away from the bones of our memory of civilization, is the middle class culture of the respectable bourgeois who sat in their well-appointed dining rooms and had silent dinner with their incredibly bored wives and just cultivated neuroses and repression. And they were horrified by the culture of the urban Catholic decadence, or of the urban and rural black community that they felt was had proven themselves unworthy of emancipation for not adopting their culture, not adopting their idea of culture. And they were virulently anti-Catholic and racist and anti-immigrant because they wanted to defend this thing. And the thing they're defending, what they read and wrote, is all gone. It's all that middlebrow shit that made up the culture that was being defended by the white middle class in America is dissolved into nothing. The only thing we have left is the low culture where people were grinding against one another, where you don't have any kind of stability, where communities are coming into clash, and in clashing create new social forms. Like Congo fucking Square, taking African rhythm and marrying it to European harmonies. Man. And of course, that is why now cultural appropriation has become a vocabulary of the same cosseted, cultureless urban middle class that there was then. Only now they've gone through the ringer of history to the point that their Puritanism is no longer expressed metaphysically because God died and they re-enthroned themselves with it. We all re-enthroned ourselves in God's absence. In that world, they have taken the Protestant morality of their Puritan forefathers, their Puritan witch-finding forefathers, and have sublimated it into a civic religion of personal virtue. And so what they end up doing is trying to create separate, stable spheres of culture the same way that the fucking dead Victorians did. And their culture is similarly doomed because conflict is the essence of culture. That is, in fact, the dialectic. I mean, look at the new Gossip Girl. The new Gossip Girl. They have said now that their rebooting of Gossip Girl will be post 9/11, or it'll be post Occupy, post BLM, which means that all these characters, these rich Dracula children in the Upper West Side, whose parents are enthroned in blood mansions, like literally Epstein-level demons and their spawn, are wrestling with their privilege and are aware of oppression and seek to recognize and hold space for, to make up for their privilege. But obviously there's still the elite demonic hordes who are ripping the flesh off of the bones of the decaying corpse of the American working broadly, as in not capitalist, as in not holding actual rentier control of transactions, which is the only place that capital accumulates now. And if you have that condition of life, you are being eaten. And you see these people expressing all of these fucking pieties while still feasting on your entrails. How the fuck are we ever supposed to transcend our identities and have a class project if that is the dynamic of culture that everyone is fucking observing? It's grim. And meanwhile, the people doing this think they're doing it to make themselves good people. Now, a show where these people were hyper woke and they used all of these, privilege checking things, these dynamics of space holding and accountability, and used them as weapons in their war with one another, their blood sport of fucking social positioning that has replaced any need to work because they're, at the end of history, they're the fucking elite in Zardoz who have driven each other insane by immortality in the fucking pleasure gardens of indulgence. So they have to make up stakes and make something up, and that is social position. And then they use these mechanisms of virtue as weapons against one another. Because remember, the middle class who creates this stuff, they believe it. This is theology to them. But the upper class do not abide by bourgeois morality. That means all the rich people, all the hyper-wealthy people who adopt woke language are doing it instrumentally as weapons, by definition, because they're in the fucking top. They're doing it. If you're a rentier, you're doing it. And so these people, there can be no earnest checking of privilege in this universe. There can only be war, reptilian war of all against all over the pathetic stakes of social positioning, using wokeness as weapons. Now, of course, someone could say, well, that's just reactionary because you're saying that all of these meaningful questions of like racial and gender justice are just weapons. No. You can easily show in a good version of this, which this won't be, let me stipulate, how these people are cynically abusing this thing, and how there is a real, like a heartbeat in all these questions. There is a real yearning for justice that could be brought into a fight for a generalized assertion of humanity in the face of the dehumanization of capitalism. But it's being used by these people in this way because they're lizards. They're lizards, folks. They are goblins. And I don't think there's anything wrong with talking to them in those terms. We have to dehumanize our ruling class. Like, intellectually and spiritually, we have to view them as lesser than human. Not in terms of, therefore you can kill them or whatever. They're still as human as like a chimp, and you wouldn't kill a chimp. It's just that they are not us. And that if we think that they think like us, if we assume the society we would build through our motivations is the one they would, even though they use the same language as us, then you are misunderstanding the world and you are missing the boat on everything. They're going to use our language, but what they mean by those words is not what we mean by them. They have a secret code imprinted on them that only they can hear because they are fundamentally at a different perspective created by their material class position sitting there next to capital, guarding the fucking algorithm with their lives and growing fat off the radiation. So a show that showed them cynically using these things, and the way that makes you have to reconsider the usefulness of this vocabulary for political aims. If this can be done, then if this is recognizable to you, and I think it would be to anybody who spends any time online talking about politics, or even media without politics, because now they're inextricable, that those dynamics are at play, and you can see in the world who is playing the part of the Gossip Girls, of the Leslie Van Houtens, or whatever the fuck what's her name? Johan van der Sloot? What's the big, it's Dutch, because they're the Upper East Side, so they're the not Jewish part, right? I believe traditionally the Upper West Side is for the Jewish, relatively old money, and the Upper East Side is for the old, like, fucking German and Dutch and English money. Yorkville, which is in the Upper East Side, was like a German ethnic community up until after World War II. That's why those are the people who filled Madison Square Garden for the fucking Bund meeting that happened in the 30s. Serena Van Woodson, there we go. Roosevelt, those people. That's where that, and of course, and then, but yeah, so they would all be the non. So I'm wondering how they're going to do representation. Are they going to lie to us and tell us that, hey, we've integrated our ruling class the way that fucking Bridgerton lied to people and said, let's have a fantasy where we can meaningfully diversify the ruling class away from conditions away from like the communities that are systematically disenfranchised by capitalism. You can keep at capitalism without the maldistribution of opportunity that is created by capitalism, that is stamped on people's flesh, that is branded on us socially in a way that overdetermines our life conditions. And now we're going to say, absolutely, no, that's not the case. You can have a guilty capitalism. You can have a capitalism where the people at the top feel bad enough that they just change everything and bring in a diversified segment of the best. Because remember, they're still meritocrats. When they say we're going to integrate the ruling class, they don't mean real. What they mean is that the elite, the meritocratically divined elite of each race and group are represented. And of course, that would realistically be a small percentage because of historical oppression. You can only get rid of that distribution of opportunity by abolishing the fucking price signal that is driving everyone insane and turning us into cannibalism. So that would be a good show, but we're not going to get that one. We're going to get a show where, like, these characters at the end of the day are just not as bad. Not even just as bad as they need to be, because they would need to be really evil, like Cruel Intentions level evil, Dangerous Liaison level evil, that kind of thing. Fuck, Heather's level evil to make this work. But even just as bad as the Gossip Girls characters were. Matt's Jeff Bezos cannibalism joke is an all-timer. I don't want to suck my own dick, but that hit me because I don't remember that joke. If anybody could put it in there. I am indeed a gossip boy of the podcast elite, and that is the most important point of all of this. Is that so somebody, I forget who it was, one of those fucking, like, was that Subrobian guy, the guy who's trying to be like a discount Greenwald Taibbi, like an Aldi brand, like trying to pick up the scraps left over, a literal like carrion bird. This guy who used to fucking flack for Pelosi is now just a carrion bird of the Substack Serengeti, and he's just looking to fucking eat what's left over in this fucking buffet, because they're not. He has to know he's not going to get Greenlaw level money, but he could get a decent chunk. He could not have to work for others, which is what everybody's looking for this day, and me too, and I can understand. It's the only rational individual goal you can pursue. And we're now living in a condition where there's no deal that you can strike with the state to assume it. You really are all for one, or all for each other. But this guy said that, like, the liberals are the social liberals are, and of course, like, the left. When these guys say the left, what they are talking about is social liberalism. And then the thing is, social liberalism is now, I would argue, enmeshed in questions of material conditions, enmeshed in questions of socialist politics, that it cannot be extricated. You can't wish it away. And I think any politics premised on the idea that you can wish it away and pretend it's not there is fanciful. I also think that the idea that you can directly confront it and try to shear material politics away from identity is impossible, because people's identities are more felt, are more conscious in their mind of the American people, who you have to be like trying to engage with, trying to literally propagandize, and you have to get them to understand concepts. And understanding concepts of identity is much easier in this country because that's what we live. So if it's a fight between the two, your fanciful notions of a class conflict-based identity that they're supposed to go from, instead of the demographic reality that life as a fucking capitalist subject imposes upon you, they're going to pick that one because it's realer to them. You're not going to be able to defeat that. I mean, some people will come to that perspective, but overall, you're fucking ice skating uphill, as Blade said, because people are going to push against that, and the entropy is going to be towards identity, which is what the cynical notion of creating like a national capitalism that's going to do like a Tucker Carlson thing is predicated on the idea of you can't beat them, join them. Use the identity that is like the center of gravity among people who work with their hands. People who are most exploited by capitalism, who feel alienated from the system the most, which is not the middle class who make up the brains of the social left. Those people either have made it to some degree, or have a dream that they will make it somehow. It's only the people who've given up that dream who can really be mobilized against capitalism per se, and actually do the job of resisting it. And so they'd say that means you need to get the passions of identity and yoke them. But it doesn't work because it will be consumed. It will be ground up. And capitalism will overawe itself onto the process, because you're not bidding with the right, with like reactionary social ideas. You're not bidding against a neutrality. You're not bidding as the only offer. There's another offer. There is the cynical offer that capital is giving to the disenfranchised, like under less educated / less compensated for their work, more precarious they're going to side with the pitch towards their skin, their national concepts, their preference for hierarchies where they are stable in a position to others and atop someone else. Those appeals are being made too, and they're going to win because those have money behind them. Though they will win because the culture creates them, because it is built into the structure. You can't do that. It is if it's cynical or earnest, it's faulty. Because if it's cynical, it just won't work. And if it's earnest, then you're a fucking racist piece of shit and shut the fuck up. But there is something to the complaint that the social liberalism, detached, like I'm saying, from the class project, detached from questions of material alienation, that the social liberals form an elite in the sense that Twitter and online and Twitter / TikTok / Instagram, not Facebook. Facebook's for old people. The younger skewing social medias are dominated by a group mind and a group think and a hive mind that is the echolocating hysteria of the urban middle class reacting to their proletarianization. It is the professionally employed in media and in culture production people of all races who are seeing their conditions deteriorate, and if they're doing well, are feeling a greater degree of guilt. And if they're doing poorly, if they're downwardly mobile, if they're stringers who are, like hanging on with their fingernails to some job in the publishing industry, or they're grinding in like the parasocial world of podcasts and fucking Substacks, they're filled with resentment. And so what they're going to create, the culture they're going to produce, the posts they're going to do, and then the shows they're going to create, the cultural objects that we all react to, that they're going to create, are going to reflect that anxiety. And so all of that boils down to the guilty ones. They want a way to preserve their system, the system that they're in consciously. They want to preserve it, but they want to feel less guilty about it. They want to put off the sense of guilt that comes with watching others suffer on their behalf. And what they come up with is, well, if we got rid of racism, which is a thing that is offensive to my eyes because I can see it, because it's created in the funhouse mirror of culture, and I can feel it in a way that I cannot feel economic exploitation. I instead create meritocracy, colorblind and gender-neutral meritocracy, as the spindle that I revolve my entire universe around. The moral fucking framework. And what that means is they're going to emphasize culture war above all else. The need to separate into discrete cultural categories around gender oppression, around racial injustice, and then essentially unify around anti-white guilt, white guilt as like the presiding emotional resonance. And then we either feel mad at white people or guilty as white people enough that we transubstantiate capitalism into an even distribution of resources that they can then operate itself mechanistically through the meritocratic pipeline and grind one half of humanity and then 2/3 and then the vast majority of it into fucking paste while the liberals feel good about themselves. And then the grinders who make up like the cannon fodder, the people posting all day at their shitty jobs, the people who actually make the things that culture reflects, and then like the voice of which is what reinforces at the level of the market these dictates. Because remember, this isn't just ideological. As the only people who talk about culture becomes this anxious middle class consuming the art of this anxious rich group and just spinning their anxieties back and forth, are going to build a culture, are going to build a culture, a collection of cultural artifacts that the rest of us react to. And that forms our understanding of politics. And that's how we destroy ourselves, essentially, by not enough of us detaching from that dynamic. We have to detach from that dynamic because it will drive us into oblivion. Because what it will do is it will make every white person make a choice between becoming self-mortifying in some way, in saying, I am in some way responsible for the bad conditions of the world. I have sinned. It is a recognition of sin that is demanded before you can be redeemed. You're demanding convert or fight to these people. And my argument would be that there are fewer people now who are convertible than there used to be. And the thing that makes you convertible is you've either been ideologically subsumed into this thing by going to college or consuming in one way the media around that is generated by this, or you are operating in alienation to it, and everything it does you hate, and it's driving you away from it. And since more and more people are being immiserated, and as you saw with the 2020 election, and you saw the big bump in Trump support in all non-white categories, regardless of like income, like working class Latinos having a huge switch over to Trump, and him getting more votes than he did last time among less frequent voters, who are the people who need to be activated for socialism. And that if that's the thing, if the question is politics about extirpating your sins, then people are going to pick, no, I would rather not apologize for this. And then if the other person is offering some sort of racial or national wage above other people, some maintenance of a position in a status quo, that's a better deal because it actually does have a material pitch. There is a materiality to culture war from the right now. Because they say we can reinscribe a hierarchy that will see you secured in your position. And that can transcend race. But it's not going to transcend the racial distribution of resources because that's what the hierarchy is built on. But you can make it into this middle or upper class through work. More and more, the left pitch, the left cultural pitch, is a spiritual one. There is no changing anything. Misery is inevitable. If anything can happen, we can redirect misery towards those responsible for it. The whites. Now, I'm not saying that's what people think, but I'm saying that is eventually the pitch that people hear because they're outside of this, the thought process that creates it. Because the thought process behind the notion of like anti-racism as an organizing principle, it all holds together, but only from within the tent, only having accepted certain principles that are not universal and that you're pushing against. The kind of things that are built in action by class consciousness and class activity. The pursuit of material politics. But with pursuit of material politics gone, there is no pitch beyond the sanctimonious and the cultural and the spiritual and the puritanical. Because at one point, if you're a regular American citizen, and this is after the end of like World War II and labor peace truly reigned. The working class, not just the domestic working class, the entire working class in the world, other than the fucking communists in China, basically, but everywhere else where there was like an entrenched working class movement, either inside capitalism or like inside whatever the hell the Soviet Union was trying to turn itself into. In all of those working classes, there was a peace treaty signed after World War II. It started in the West. It was headquartered in the retreat of the working class in the face of the reactionary response to World War II. the reactionary tide that World War II unleashed. They were unprepared for it, and they were defeated. The purge of the LFL-CIO and the leading labor unions of communists in the early 50s, coupled with the Taft-Hartley bill, essentially eviscerated the American working class as a politically coherent set of agenda points that it could put to the regular person. Because that's the thing. In America's democracy, after that treaty had been signed, and it was signed at Potsdam by Stalin too. Stalin said, we're going to put our guns down. We're going to stop pushing beyond these points as long as you concede them. And that, during that, people thought that that was just some people at the time thought that they were just signing a peace treaty, but they were signing a truce. At the time, I would say everybody in that war, everybody at every line in the Western communist parties, in the Western labor union movements, in the Western social democratic parties, and in the Communist Party in Russia, they all thought they were signing a truce where they could settle themselves in for the long haul. But what they actually, in retrospect, were signing were fucking articles of surrender. The articles of surrender meant that the working class was going to demobilize. And it did over the course of the Cold War. So that when the 70s came, there was nobody there to coherently express a working class objection to neoliberalism in the political sphere. Because remember, we did not have mass party politics in this country. What we had instead was politics as a consumer identity. I am a Democrat, not because I am a member of the Democratic Party, that I attend its caucuses, that I vote in its by-elections, that I am like a local ward healer or something, or that I have like a dual union card and party membership card, and that I pay dues to the party, and that I have influence in its internal democracy. I vote for it. I vote for the party. Just like I buy Pepsi instead of Coke, just like I make any other consumer decision in my life. And so it's integrated into my mind as a consumer, as an expression of my consumer identity that is formed elsewhere. And so when it's time to vote in this post-war period, before the formal mechanisms are destroyed in the 70s, because they can no longer be afforded by capitalism as it enters its decline phase globally after becoming a global system, which happened as soon as the global system was created, its expiration date was ensured. And now we're facing the 21st century is the real crisis created by that entry of entropy into the system. There was nobody there to fight. There was nobody there to say, hey, don't let this happen. The political parties just expressed cultural sentiments, and those ended up replacing all of the material ideas. So that when somebody votes, they are voting about what kind of person they think the parties see them as, and what kind of person that they want to see reflected in the party. And that means that they're operating from identity formations that have nothing to do with their status as workers, that have everything to do with their demographic distribution, geographically, racially, all of those things determining our identity. And so if there is no representation of something that offers an appeal to that worker identity, it shrivels up and falls away. It literally gets necrotic. And that's what you see over the course of the fucking 70s and 80s, is the necrosis, as a bunch of working class people start voting Republican out of identity, absent class politics, and as a bunch of people stop voting. Those two phenomenon are the result of necrosis of the body politic, the working class American body politic. And now that's all we have. And it is now entering a terminal state of cannibal. It is the fat stores are being eaten. We essentially have cancer socially, because there is no more healthy dynamic undergirding this thing. Because there's no way to relieve what the political system did before was it provided a signal to capital, like any of the other signals that generate like the response nexus of capital, a signal saying, hey, the speed of exploitation in this system, the speed of proletarianization and of the in this system is exceeding the social capacity to absorb it. You need to put the brakes on, because the thing can't put brakes on itself. It is the brake pads. And after 1979, after the Volcker shock, put it bluntly, the brake lines were cut. And so we're hitting the fucking button as hard as we can. We're hitting the pedal, we're mashing the fucking brake pedal as hard as we can, but it is not, the pads are not touching the fucking wheel. But this is a long, incredibly long way to say that what this means is that, in a real respect, the conservatives like that Mastrobian guy, or rather like the pissed off liberals, like the Mastrobian guy, like Glenn Greenwald, like Taibbi, like that entire, the post-left, like that entire reaction, is basically people coming to terms in some way with the fact that culture is now hegemonically left/liberal socially. That means it is enmeshed in material politics, because you cannot extract these things. Racial justice is part of class fucking justice. Of course it is. You cannot have one without the other. They have to work in tandem. One cannot be abolished at the behest of the other, because then you destroy the basis of the social solidarity that is our only weapon against capitalism. Of course you need fucking racial justice. You need gender justice. You need all this shit. It is unquestionable. But how do you fucking protect them both? What political expression and articulation can appeal to people in a way that has them act in the same way, vote in the same way, go to the same events in the same way, coordinate behavior? Because they can't coordinate behavior by identity, because they're separated by identity. Because of racism, because of all the stuff you people fucking talk about all day. All the stuff that we're supposed to be conscious of every day. The racial separation created by redlining and the fucking Federal Housing Administration and Jim Crow and the disposition of black landowners after the Civil War. Of course, that was all fucking. Of course, that's what is defining all of this now. That's all real. But the result of that is that political power and demography is still in the hands of the settler colonists. So how do you culturally reach the settler colonists? And when I say culturally, I mean politically, because now they're the same thing. How do you organize political campaigns and the cultural things around political campaigns? The counter-hegemonic elements around a politics opposed to this and orthogonal to it. Do you emphasize original sin and white privilege and fragility to people who are settler colonists, who have had their cultural concepts defined by settler colonialism, that they are only now becoming alienated from because the deal they thought they were getting as kids is falling apart? They would still, the hope we have is that enough people get alienated from the system by being dispossessed from their position of relative social power so that they can be organized and mobilized. How do you do that? And that is a question of what issues you emphasize, what issues you campaign for, what candidates you select, what vocabulary you use in campaigns and in culture. And that should define your approach to every one of these questions. But I think for a lot of people, including good-intentioned people who have good ideas and are trying their best and are very smart and perceptive, they are a lot of the times just confusing the moral question of whether you need to express socially a solidarity to the emotional truth of oppression in America. If you think deep down that you can't get to the social solidarity that will overthrow capitalism without some white racial reckoning, then you will think that. And the thing is, that's not true, because that can't come. A white racial reckoning in the context of continued social immiseration, guess what? A white racial reckoning is white nationalism. It is race realism. It is reinscribing the hierarchy in fucking blood. And the thing is that if you're someone who has to go online and talk about this stuff all the time, especially if you're a white person, that sucks. That sucks because there are all these questions that boil down to your public performance. That you can't help any of these points. There's nothing you can do but add your stupid voice. And if that's the case, then you feel a moral obligation to add your voice to the chorus of racial justice. And you're doing it out of sincere belief in your own, not just personal virtue, but your revolutionary efficacy. You think you're doing the right thing, not for yourself, but for everybody. And I just don't think you are, because what is pulling you in that direction is the abstract flattening of the online and disputatious space, where you have to treat every question as a moral question that you have to express a moral position on, because moral suasion is the only politics that can be articulated in the digital space. And so as a result, the only way to win is not to play. You can't talk about this shit. Talk about what matters. Organize around what matters. Do not set about making it your mission to de-wokeify the left, because then you're just providing grist for the mill and part of the dynamic of cultural confusion and propaganda and mysticism that obscures the fucking questions that are right in front of us. Focus on what matters and fucking accept the reality of racial fucking justice and the need for it, and gender justice and everything else, a need for a reckoning, but go about making it in the material world, not in the kingdom of fucking heaven. Make it, inscribe it in the goddamn land. That's what the psycho-Protestants have been doing to this fucking country for 500 years, and they're on the verge of destroying the earth. We need to grab the goddamn reins from them and inscribe justice in the land, not in heaven. And the heaven they'll create will be either it'll be the fantasy of moral transcendence now, but then even if it's even successful, capitalism lives. Woke finance capitalism wins. It defeats national capitalism, the reptile, and of course it leaves the corpse of the working class to rot. And technology keeps it alive, because the technology would have to intervene to keep this possible. You're going to have a situation where you have a fucking Bridgerton-ass ruling class ruling over a techno hellscape. I'm trying to think of the name of the short story that's one of the most chilling things I've ever read. It's a sci-fi short story about a post-singularity world called The People of Sand and Slag, I think. It's one of the most haunting pieces of science fiction I've ever read, because it absolutely understands where all this ends up, regardless of who wins the culture war. Because as long as we don't grab the reins from this suicide machine we've put in our own DNA, then we're going to be destroyed. But because this is such a powerful it's such a powerful imaginative realm that we can inhabit, because it is created by the culture we consume. It's very easy to see inside this thing and think you're seeing the contours of reality. And the culture war, the right populist culture war argument is premised on the underlying notion that the elite within this thing can make conditions. And I would say that is wrong. There is a social liberal elite within the space of social media that creates culture. Everything, all of the right ideas, you know this is true. All the right ideas in social media are the ideas of social liberalism, sprinkled with that remnant of class consciousness that people have, that phantom limb that people try to fucking express, but only in the context dominated by social liberalism, over-determined by the capital that is creating this culture in the first place. Both the monopolized Silicon Valley behemoths who control social media, and also the content behemoths who make up all of the formal culture created out of this. All the movies and TV shows inspired by Twitter threads, and whose plots are totally determined by what the studio thinks people are going to think about it. All of this determined by not ideas, but by good old-fashioned material considerations. Because they have detached culture making from any accountability in the market, right? Like they've replaced ad dollars that corresponded to anything, like they did in the old Nielsen days, with a new ad reality based on the data dollar, where it doesn't matter, where the purpose of advertising is not to get a discrete outcome. It is now just to keep advertising a thing you pay for, because that is what circulates capital through the tech sector and through the cultural creation sector, through the superstructure of American civilization, and most importantly, the cultural output, the intellectual property that we export. That's all created and overdetermined by these massive formations of capital that now they don't fucking get money from your ad dollar, you buying Tide. They get money from the state in the form of quantitative easing. Giant slush fund of cash just pouring all over them. That's where they get their money. It doesn't fucking matter if you buy Tide or fucking Cheer. What matters is that there's a commercial for Tide or Cheer that someone can pay for. What that means is that you can put anything on there as long as people within the bubble talk about it. And so we get a reinforced hive mind idea of social liberalism. And that seems, if you're from the outside of it and alienated from it, because of your demographic position, because you don't relate to this stuff, because you didn't have the right experiences, to make you agreeable to it. You either didn't encounter college ideas or encountered them in a way that made them rub you the wrong way. Like you're white and they were saying white people are bad, and you don't have the understanding of what those words mean that they do to get what they're trying to say. And all you hear is that you suck as a white male or as a white person or as an American or as a cop or as an oil worker. And then you hear that because there's no other appeal. There's no real class position appeal, because that's not what gets replicated in the culture. That gets washed out. So this right populist critique says these guys are creating reality with this shit. No. If anything, reality is being created by conservatives because they are actually exercising coordinated political power. Like that's the thing that national capitalism has going for it in the face of woke capitalism, is that they do actually have minoritarian control of systems of government. The constitutional order has given them extractive capital, fixed American capital, has given them more political control than anybody else. Certainly woke capital, all those people, they might all think that they've tried to make capitalism better by giving away the store to globalism and globalization and deindustrialization. They've made it so that there is nothing in the appeal of broadly conceived leftism made within cultural productive mechanisms to appeal to them. There's nothing. It's been dissolved out. And that means that when the still mobilized minoritarian institutions of reactionary national capital, which are headquartered still with billionaires, not with the grassroots, when they see culture war in the ether of culture, in the ether of social media, and then entertainment, they see a way to get their voters to vote a certain way, which ostensibly is about something like CRT, or before that, fucking Common Core, but it's actually about voting in Republicans who will do Republican shit. And that is increasingly stuff that is hostile to global forces, including global capital, but only to sustain hierarchies, not to transcend them, which is why national capitalism is doomed and why it shouldn't be supported, because it cannot defeat capitalism on its terms. By cutting out the possibility of social solidarity between races and gender groupings and all that shit, you are ensuring your own defeat because you're cutting your fucking throat demographically. Because numbers are all we have, baby. Numbers are all we got. And national capitalism, even though it is easier in terms of imagining getting people to vote on your program, you're just going to be being led along for the ride by capital the same way that all the socialists who think that, yes, we need to get reparations first, they think they're fucking helping the revolution, but they're being pulled along by the Democrats in the same way that those reactionary national capitalists are being pulled along by the Republicans. Headquarters of capital, reinscribing of class domination. They don't give a fuck about the rest. That'll come as may. And of course, the national capitalists at the top, they don't think that they're doing that. A lot of them, like the Mercers, they think that they're going to preserve national white folkways, but they're kidding themselves. It's delusional, just like it's delusional on the left. So they will be defeated. And then it will be autonomous drones patrolling a blasted hellscape. And outside the walls of the hellscape will be the land of homo saucer, the citizen without dignity. The human person who has been stripped of their humanity has been taken to the level of like an endangered species. The moral claim that a American citizen used to be able to make to the heart, to the real, to the heart of an other American, that's supposed to be the basis for any kind of national identity, right? Because national identity is some sort of connection that transcends the self. That is over time, of course. I mean, it's determined on some people being outside of it completely, like black people, like Native Americans. It depends on there being an other who is not you. And those people are permanently prescribed and dominated. And hey, what do you know? It also keeps capitalism generating. It also prevents the accumulation of the sufficient social solidarity to overcome capitalism. It's almost like this is the one weird trick using expropriated land and labor from an outside class that allowed capitalism to buy off the working class within the center of the machine after World War II. And of course, you could say, "Oh, that's like settlers. That's like, that's just Maoist third worldism." I don't think so, because I think that is predicated on like a fixed destiny, and I really think that this question has been contested deeply all throughout time and is still being contested. I think the Maoist third world error, and I think it is an error made out of a desire to avoid having to do real work, because if you really do think that there's nothing to be done in the center of the empire, you really can just post without guilt. You can post and eat the bugs and live in the pod and watch the Marvel shows, ironically, if you really think that there's nothing to be done in the center. That is the Maoist failure. The description of the mechanism whereby a working class is bought off by the alienation of the system being put off on others, exploited labor done by others, land taken from others, like ways of life destroyed by others. That's true, but it's always been contested. And the arc of our history is the arc of that contest. The Civil War was part of that contest. Reconstruction was part of that contest. The populist movement, the Socialist Party, the fucking first Red Scare, the emergence of the U.S. Communist Party, the fucking New Deal, the Popular Front that defined like the liberal left coalition against fascism, the post-war strike wave of the late 1940s that was really like the final surrender of the American working class. Like, these are all key points of contention. And even though we're at the end stage, we're still all in contention, and we have to do something. Because we don't know where it's going to start. We don't know where, as Bain said, the fire will rise. You just have to be in a position to do something when it comes, and to feed the fucking flames with your own action, carried out close to the bone and not at the level of culture and fantasy. And that's a challenge we all have to make to ourselves. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to involve becoming different people with different values. And that means surrendering something of yourself, which is not something that the liberal self accedes to. The liberal self repels from that. And we are all liberals. We are all liberals of the self. We have to transcend that. But we have to fight through this. This is the thing. This is individually, this is the fucking white blood cells of capitalism defending us from the virus, the viral infection, the good virus, the cleansing virus of fucking socialism. You got to just keep sharpening your axe, as Lincoln said. That means jacking off if you have to, but it also means working close to the bone. And I hope to be doing some of that in the near future. There's people doing stuff here in LA that I'm very excited about. I know that it's probably totally quixotic, but I also accept that at some point I have to make a leap of faith. I have to do the Kierkegaard thing, and it might be wrong in some objective sense, but me doing it isn't wrong because I'm doing it from an actual intention of engaging in work that is self-effacing in the sense that it is not maximally pleasing to the senses, that it is a bit of a sacrifice, that it means more to others than me. And we'll see what it is. But I have to get to the point where I can accept it. I have to convince myself, and that is a question of building a spiritual reservoir, building an extended sense of meaning, an extended sense of purpose, and an extensive sense of the good that is not hedonic. But we're fighting against the fact that we're inscribed with hedonic calculus. That's all we have. That's what we have instead of a soul, is a hedonic calculator. Now, through the functioning of the hedonic calculator, we create a soul. A soul is created through our making decisions and living with them and remembering them. That's what makes their soul. But it is made up of these decisions made by the hedonic calculator. And then it is a question of the soul to intervene on this mechanism, to put a stick in the spokes. And yes, that is the snake eating its tail. That is the fundamental, that is the Mobius strip. Because we can never resolve these things. The process is what defines them. They are nothing without the process. And so we can't live outside of them. And that's one of the things that makes us flee from challenging our spiritual notions and our priorities, our emotional priorities, because it means being, in a real sense, a different person. A national holiday where we all take mushrooms at the same time. I gotta say, not the worst idea in the world. I am not a fan of the idea that, if you just got rich people to do drugs, they would be evil. The people who most assiduously consume psychedelics in this country are the most demonic people on earth. They see here's a thing that expands your sensory apparatus. I will use this to further my attempt to become a god on earth. I will further it by trying to inscribe they're so convinced and so metaphysically wedded to their separateness by the life they've lived that when they expand their consciousness, they expand that sense of them. There is really a sense of a touch to the divine that happens when you're on psychedelics. But the thing is that because you are an individual, when you get in touch with the divine through an intensity of sensory perception that comes from the taking of a psychedelic, that means that you come in touch with the universe, which is God, which means that you as an individual are literally a God in the sense that you are composed entirely of the universe, even though you can't perceive all of it. Now, of course, whether or not that's what lingers, whether or not that's the shape of the feeling that you take with you out of the trip, boils down to what your understanding of these concepts comes from. And if you've lived your life as a fucking isolated a keen blade of social mayhem, a keenly sharpened straight razor that is hacking away at social bonds, your connection to anybody but yourself and your own consciousness, using that separateness to dominate technology, to create a world where you are the only living thing, surrounded by a technological reflection of yourself. You have weaved yourself into this katana of capitalism. That expanded consciousness is just going to make you better at doing that. So it's not just people should do this, but the idea of like a national day of simultaneous doing it. Obviously, you wouldn't get anything like everybody the first time, but who knows what kind of spark flies in if it scales, like if it turns into a thing that a number of people do and more people do it, and especially if they do it together, like everyone's doing it at the same time, but we're all on our computers, or we're all like staring at a bush. We're like in groups. I don't know. That's pretty fucking, it's all about intention. And I don't think just saying a national day of that is enough intention. It would have to start smaller. It would have to emerge from febrile, local experimentation. A reaffirmation of the Greek mysteries that used to like fire Greco-Roman society and social order. But again, that would not be a national day of X, because that's everybody deciding to, buy the world a Coke, like the end of Mad Men. But who knows? Maybe you would get a kindling. You'd get a roaring fire. I went to Shanghai once, and I went to the building in the French concession that was part of the treaty ports that were wrested from the Qing Empire, the Manchus, by the Western powers during the Century of Humiliation. I went to the building in the French concession where the Chinese Communist Party was founded, and it's a museum now. And they have the room. The room just has a table. It just has the table. But there is, in the attached museum, there is a replica of the table with life-size dummies of everybody who had been in the room sitting around the table. And it's like 22 guys. And of course, Mao, even though he was a junior partner at that point, he was not one of the main founders of the Chinese Communist Party. Those guys all died over the course of the revolution. He was not one of the leading voices at the time, but he's the one, of course, standing and pointing at a map or something. And it was like, God damn, 22 fucking dudes. And they ended up taking over the whole country. And it's like, yeah, because it was 22 people in a room, 22 people in a room who then went out and went into rooms with other people, went into rooms with other people, went into fields with other people, went into struggle with other people. Did not go off to post. Some of them posted, but what they did was they posted in newspapers that were read in workplaces by workers. Man, I still think I missed one more point about that Cisnerobian guy, and I think it is that what this boils down to is these people have the basic identity of someone who should be a cultural liberal. They live urban lives. They either have jobs in the cultural production sector, or are adjacent to the cultural production sector, or are would-be like grinders in entrepreneurs in the cultural sector space. Like they want a Substack. They would like a podcast. They are in that space. They have been demographically determined. They went to college, mostly, or they went to college, and they resent the fact that they have to observe this cultural production mechanism that is alienating to them. They don't like it. They don't have either the naive desire to make a revolution like a lot of socialists have, or the felt emotional connection that actual oppressed groups feel when they see it, an actual validation through representation, genuine feelings that they have that aren't made up and aren't propaganda and aren't lies created to destroy class solidarity, are real things that really have to be dealt with if you're going to create a working class counter hegemony within the culture. Sorry, they can't be wished away. But they're experienced one way and they're experienced differently. And so if you want to engage in this, you want to tweet and stuff, you essentially, if you can't be a Republican. You cannot be a Trumpist. You cannot accept conservatism from the right, because then you are out of it. You're out. You're over in the kiddie pool. You're on Parler and Gab. You are fucking replying to Sean Hannity. You're with the squares. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. You're at the nursing home with your grandma and grandpa, who you have the same fucking politics as, but who you, of course, don't want to hang out with. You don't want to watch fucking The Price is Right with your grandparents, which is what Facebook is, what Fox News is, what Onan is. Now, that is only if you are one of these acculturated college graduate type people. I must say that. Outside of it, you don't necessarily experience that way. But they experience it as, this is old people shit. This is for rubes. This is for squares. This is for people who don't get all the angles like I do. So then, what do? You create a system where you can take the other side. You can take the reactionary, culturally reactionary side in these things from the left or from a liberal center. And that, or if you're like one of these guys, but you're a full Nazi and you don't give a shit about appearing nice to polite society or getting good entertainment because hating that shit is like your identity. You imagine that you're actually the vanguard of a national socialist project. You and Tucker Carlson are going to turn America into a Herrenvolk fucking democracy along not whiteness, but by traditional hierarchies associated around like masculinity. Yes, race, but not like one drop race. Like accommodating the political reality of actually building a fucking political constituency to do something with laws and statutes as opposed to fucking hashtags, which is all that the goddamn liberals get out of their elite control. So they're not an elite. If anything, you need them more than anybody because you are the ones who create the space for you. Because if that wasn't the case, if there was a working class, cultural, counter-hegemonic, like generated thing, like a political project married to a cultural project that was explicitly oriented around class and did not disproportionately be created by rich kids and bored and anxious rich kids and downwardly mobile sons of the middle class, but actual workers like who built this shit out of their experience of exploitation. If you had to deal with that, then you'd have to fucking make a choice. Then you'd have to choose between your comfortable position and your love of cultural indulgence as identity. Ooh, watching my shows and doing my posts and pretending that I'm a fucking intellectual that we're all doing. You wouldn't be able to do it because you would have to you'd have to become one of the fucking grandpas or one of the Nazis. You'd have to turn in your bourgeois card and essentially devolve into one of the Neanderthals. And you don't want to do that. You want to be able to enjoy culture through the veil of eroticism and aesthetic indulgence and decadence that defines our moment of culture. You want in on the decadence is what it is. And if you want in on the decadence, then you cannot endorse actual socialism. You cannot work for actual socialism any more than the rich liberals can. They're addicted to the opposite of decadence. They're addicted to the hair shirt. They're addicted to penitence. I mean, all right, somebody says, like, what about black conservatives like Larry Elder and Candace Owens? In the black community, this same thing is happening because there are wealthy black people, there are middle class black people, there are people caught in the same crux of expectation as white people. But layered on top of their experience of that is the layer of living as a black person in America, which they have as one of the defining features of their individualized consumer identities. And what that ends up doing is it operates as the closest thing we have to class fucking solidarity in this country is in the black community. It isn't, but it is the closest we have because of the experience, the racial experience of being a black person that transcends class. Now, people can point out, and rightly so, that wealthier black people do not suffer, like the black people who make culture, for example. The black people who are being hired to fill spots in the culture production machine to diversify the point of view. They do not experience the real sharp edge of racial discrimination in this country. The early death rates from violence and the incarceration, higher risk of incarceration, but by definition, the people who are making culture are not the ones who are being incarcerated. But they are experiencing racism because of the system designed around this reality. And so they have experience being black that gives them a felt connection to poorer black people, a felt connection to poorer black people that does not exist in the white community, because whiteness is the absence of race. Whiteness means you don't have to think racially. White people are becoming racially aware because now we're in a crisis and people are being immiserated and feeling precarious and are alienated from the system. When America had promise and when America reached its decadent middle century at détente, that wasn't the case. And those systems, those formations still exist, but now they're in crisis. And everyone is picking a way to think about being white, but it is filling a vacuum. And so what that means is that if you're a black person who you will have the same concerns about hierarchy, if you're a black person within capitalism who benefits from capitalism, which is all the ones who succeed because that's America is capitalism. So there are black people by definition who benefit, who are on the top end of the distribution, even though they are still racially oppressed and they are still not a full citizen in like the metaphysical sense that white people are, because citizenship is defined as whiteness and that's changeable and stuff, but that is like the basic framework of it. So you have that feeling of alienation from America and you have to express it. And there are several black conservative traditions that express that alienation. Like the Garveyite notion of black separatism and black capitalism is basically that the same way that conservatism blames the non-citizen for the ailings of the republic, black conservatism blames whiteness. And therefore, one argument for that is, well, if you got whites out of the equation, you would have just distribution within a hierarchy determined by, I think if it ever got refined enough, it would get to fucking meritocracy. It would be a recreation of liberalism and the metaphysics of neoliberalism. And Clarence Thomas is a good expression of that. Clarence Thomas believes that racism is real, believes that white racism is in fact the cause of black pathologies. But as a result, he thinks that all attempts to mitigate it through legislation are failure, are doomed, will only make things worse because they cannot defeat the centrality of white racism. He is a racial pessimist, much like the fucking black radicals that people like nowadays are. goes. He is a race realist. And so his legislature is organized around maintaining the hierarchies and structures imposed by capitalism within the black community as a bulwark against the acidic association of black and white. But that kind of, and like Hotep is like that. Hotep is essentially just an absolute mirror image of MRA, Rightosphere, Red Pill, white supremacy, internet white supremacy. It is online. It is white. It is black incels, black guys who are on the internet, because they have nothing else to do, just like the white guys who created the entire red pill movement, but without the ability to have race as part of it, without racial anxiety, racial guilt as part of their understanding of themselves. But these things get confused because we don't have a vocabulary to express this reality. That is why you see people talk about like Tariq Nasheed as being on the left in some meaningful sense, because he supports reparations. I mean, the thing is that like the without separation, like Garvey at least said that we'll do it in Africa what the whites did in America. That was Garvey's vision. We'll do in America, we will do our own America in Africa. That at least was coherent because hey, we can get the land and we can build out a social order out of this. If you stay within capitalism, if you will stay within a multiracial society, you'll never do it. The goal, and that's why the politics of these people and the notions of reparations that they generate really are like badgering white people into feeling guilty enough to give it up, because they interact with white people who are all guilty as shit. So they think, oh, we'll just badger the white people until they agree to do it out of guilt. But they are the minority. They're just the elite of the culture sphere. And when the majority are forced to choose between a politics of material hierarchy that they might be above others in and just a spiritual penance with no material benefit, they're going to probably break away from reparations. It's why this is such a confused and frustrating debate and so pointless, because these words don't mean it is Wittgenstein's hell. It is mutually overlapping misunderstandings. There is no common vocabulary here, because everyone is looking through all of these questions through cultural bafflers, because there is no astringent material connective tissue of class politics. There's nobody doing work outside of defining themselves in a consumer ether. So all these terms are mystified, which is why you can't get any meaning out of the elite politics, out of politics as a cultural expression. And that means that there is no meaningful way that these people are elite. The argument for that they're elite means you have to fight them. But the only way you can fight them that will be heard is to take the other side in the culture war, to fill in the fucking space where the fight goes, to direct people's attention elsewhere. It's all you can do is fucking sheepdog people into the cave to watch the fucking reflection of the fire on the wall. The only way you can justify it is these people are elite. They're determining things. Nope. The fact that they control everything and the general shit they put out will, but specifically, no. Your participation in this thing is meaningless, other than as ballast. More weight to fill out the balloon. If you're going to be publicly expressing politics, it is incumbent upon you to deny fire to this fucking, fuel to this fire. You deny kindling to this. You no-butt it. You be the worst improv fucking partner. Like, imagine every invitation to argue any of these points, or to express them if you were a cultural producer, and engage them as a cultural producer, is generated by a desire to, like, convince people. You will not be doing so. You'll be driving further the political dynamic that will eventually result in a crisis. Like, I gotta say, people who are talking about, hey, you know, the Republicans might actually do a clerical coup, a paperwork coup in 2024, and I say, yeah, of course they could. What they're doing at the state level, absolutely they could. And the reason they're doing that, this is the problem. When people talk about this, they want you to engage with it on the level of, look at how evil the Republicans are. You need to acknowledge that this is an anti-democratic, fascist threat. Because look what they want to do. I say, don't engage on that, because guess what? They've always wanted to do this. They have always found democracy to be a fucking abomination, and they've been trying to reverse it ever since the fucking labor peace. These are the people who rebelled at the fucking signing ceremonies. These are the people who said no. And they formed the backbone of the early, the Taft movement, tried to make the isolationist Robert Taft, Republican nominee in 1952, when the Eastern bankers literally used propaganda over the airwaves to get the fucking dumbasses in the auditorium at the convention to vote for Eisenhower. They brought Eisenhower in from being literally the president of Columbia University, being a lifelong apolitical person who had been fucking approached by the Democrats to run for president too, and was weighing the offers. Come in and make him the fucking president nominee. That is now the entire GOP, and it's always been premised on baronial authority, and that is not democratic. The thing is that the efficacy of their resistance to it was determined by the resistance. They did what they could get away with. They have always done what they can get away with. If they are planning a judicial coup, if Trump thought he had enough faith that by doing whatever half-ass thing he did to try to get them to overturn the election, he earnestly believed in his heart that if they succeeded, he would have stayed president. Now, of course, he's a half-assed, lazy idiot, so he didn't have any groundwork laid. He had done nothing to prepare for the moment. Now, of course, having seen how technically close it got, Republicans are at the grassroots trying to build a bridgehead to that maybe doing that if they get closer next time. But once again, what is predicating these moves is the belief that they would get away with it, that there would not be sufficient resistance to stop them. That is the point about this that matters. That is what it needs to be the fundamental question that generates all social or all questions of political strategy, tactics, cultural production, everything. How do you build resistance to it? And that the argument of the people who want to focus on the evil of the Republicans is they might give you that and say you're right. That is the signal question. How do we do it? We scare everybody about how bad the Republicans are. Nope. Because your revulsion to the Republicans on a moral level corresponds to your position in the fucking liberal bubble, in the social liberal bubble, which has already been determined to not be enough. Because they're all people who are not invested in fighting the system. They're invested in perpetuating the system. The same people who in 2000 let Bush steal it will let them steal it in 2024 if they're fighting on the grounds of culture. No one will die for the Democratic Party. That is what the Republicans know, and is what's driving them. And you can't scare them about the Republicans because that doesn't work on the people you need it to work on. You need numbers, you need fucking sinews, you need people in the streets, people organizing, people at places where capital can be disrupted through coordinated labor action, the revoking of labor power at key moments in transportation infrastructure, in the bottlenecks of the just-in-time transmission belt. And my entire contention, and others can argue, is that yelling about how scary and bad the Republicans are will not get you there. If they do steal it in 2024, that's it. It's stolen. And then you're not getting in elections. If you want to fight the system, you're going to have to fight it with your fucking hands. You're going to have to actually risk something. You're going to have to genuinely risk something. And I know that all the people on this side of that question, all the people on this side, all the people theoretically imagining this 2024 pooched, they imagine that if they were in the other side, if you snapped your fingers on them and said, hey, guys, there was a coup, Trump or DeSantis is ruling now in opposition to a clear electoral outcome. because he got the Supreme Court to go along, or he got House of Representatives to not recognize the electors from the states that the Democrat won. I'm going to fight. How many people said, if they try to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, we're going to burn it all down? How many people said that? They can all think that now. If it happens in 4 years, and it comes down to a question of and remember, the people we're talking about are the people who respond to the moral point, who respond to politics at this moral level of virtue and of representation. We already know that they are within this bubble. And what puts them in the bubble is their position relatively comfortable within the system. They have jobs. Now, some of them are getting more immiserated, but the ones who do the most of the creating and engaging of it are materially comfortable. And my posit is that in 2024, they would be unless there is all this happens with like an economic collapse. But honestly, I don't even think that would necessarily do it, because the collapse is going to hurt people outside of the circle disproportionately. And the inside, there's going to be a lot of familial wealth that will cushion the blow. They're not going to fucking want to die for their beliefs. And the poor people are not going to want to die for the Democratic Party. They're not at the bottom. They're not going to fight for this Democratic Party, and the people who really believe in the Democratic Party won't fight because they're too comfortable. And so the politics determined within the bubble on the left, both the liberals and the leftists who have decided that a cultural popular front led by liberals is the way towards class consciousness and towards a material confrontation with capital at this moment of crisis. I think that question of whether that is possible is the one everyone has to confront and answer for themselves. I am confident that it is no. But I can understand that people will, in good faith, disagree. But I do also think that the only thing that will break this deadlock is not anybody arguing anybody else out of a position, but by people living in their lives, people having experiences that make them test their ideas against reality. And then in the test, we'll see what stands up. We'll see where the sinews actually are. We'll see where the joints are. We'll see where the leverage points are. And then we will react. Well, some of us will react like we're still in the fucking... We'll react because their head's in the box, and they will not be able to be dealt... They will not be able to be reasoned with. But if it works, if your adaptation is selected for, you can beat them because you're going to get more people. Because you're going to be more fucking attractive to the people who need to be attracted. You will win the fight. You don't have to fucking complain about it. You will win. All right, I went really long today. Felt like this was good. I hope it made sense. Oh, right. As I leave, just let me say, put Rick and Morty in charge of the virus. Please, please, please put Rick and Morty in charge of the virus and also the climate. But I know we got some problems with the climate. I think if we put Rick and Morty in charge of them, everything would be fine. Bye.